bow tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee. David Tulis.
Grandma yelling in a very complicated bit of testimony that you heard this morning here at News Radio at America's First News is reducing by 1/4 percentage point the rate of interest that is charged among banks. It's called the federal funds rate, and it is influential in the paper money lending sector. She also says that she's going to reduce slowly by plan, according to law, she says, the prodigious holdings of bad paper that the bank is holding at full face value, pretending to be at full face value, about $3 trillion of IOUs from the time of the bank collapse. That's bad debt, that is stodgy paper, that's rescue, bailed out paper, and also government debt, which the Fed monetizes. It takes federal debt, the promises to pay, and then injects that as credit in the economy. And that's where we have this great boom in the economy. It's coming from the issuance of new dollars, right? New money. And occasionally you'll read in the paper a story about the problem that creates, and that is, when is all that excess sopped back up? When does the system take back into itself and eliminate the dollars that it created in the salvation expansion, right? In the expansion of credit, the hurtling of liquidity through all the channels of commerce to save the system, right? When is that credit going to be pulled back in, paid off, and written off, right? If it's paid, it's written off. The problem is that the grandma at the head of the system can't do that. She dare not eliminate that portfolio. She dare not sop up all the excess, because there would be a crisis in confidence. There would be a collapse in the stock market, and the bubble that the central bank has been studiously building for the past 10 years would suddenly pop. It would be seen as a bubble. There would not be the means of repayment. The new debts that comes in the market by the way of loans would not be there to pay back the old debt. And so you would suddenly have companies going belly up that can't pay, and you would have a ripple effect, a so-called the cascading effect that was feared back in the meltdown of 2008, in which the whole system was said to face liquidation if the good people with TARP, the Troubled Asset, recovery program, TARP dollars did not come in to the tune of $900 billion to save the banking sector, right? The banking sector is remarkable, if you think about it, because it is the only industry in the world that makes money from nothing, that creates dollars by book entry, and yet has to be saved by government when its successes breeds excesses, which breeds collapse. That is a cycle that has happened over and over again. And now that the economy, since the time of Dr. Greenspan, has gone off of any connection with lawful coin and currency, the economy has been all about creating more dollars. And all the world's economies are playing the same game. The central banks around the world doing the same thing, all creating giant expansions in their economies, each racing the other, as it were, to debase the national currency more than other countries are debasing theirs, so that there might be a gain in the exchange rate. That's the exchange rate is important. So if everybody's inflating at the same time, you really can't tell who's the worse off. And the parties worse off are those who are not at the table, not by any stretch of the imagination. Those are common people, working people like you and me. We have to work for our dollars. We have to show value for every dollar that comes in. We have to provide a service or a benefit. We have to yield natural resources, time, skill, energy, knowledge of processes, repair services, advertising services in my case, and journalism services. All these, think about your own field. All these have to be yielded for dollars, which have to be earned. And yet the good people, grandma yelling at their head, simply create the money from nothing. And that's called fractional reserve banking. That's called central banking. And we are, but don't be too deep about this, right? Just take it as good news. Take it as a bit of danger ahead, right? Because raising the interest rate, even a quarter of a point, may set the economy into a tailspin. We can hear things like that being said. May threaten the expansion, and so on. Those things are there, and they're there because moral law has been violated. I would say God's law has been violated. The chief law violated is the 8th commandment forbidding theft. The other one would be the 9th commandment, bear false witness, and that's because of the official counterfeiting by the national government. But the 8th commandment forbids, in the particulars, false weights and measures, and that would be a false weight in biblical times would be when the seller, if he's selling a good, he'll have a light metal, so that will weigh out the grain or the beans that you're buying, and you'll be getting less than what you agreed to because of his light weight on the scale. And if he's the buyer, he'll have a heavy weight on the scale that gives him more of the product for the same amount of money. So that's called dishonest weights, and they are called by God himself an abomination. They are how the rich, the great, and the mighty indulge themselves in fleecing the poor, right? The poor people who have no control over this. And those are the people in the lower 80% of the economy who have perhaps about less than 10% of the net worth of the country is in the hands of those few people. Of those many people, that 80% of the economy. The top 0.5% have about 40% of the economy, or maybe 30%. And the middle class, that would be probably you. We have about a very large group of people as well, about 10%. So that's roughly what we have. And the Marxists, the Bernie Sanderses, the Democrats sometimes say things like that. And I would be careful about their analysis because their solution is always another government program. Our solution here on the David Tulis Show would be simply respect for the Constitution and a prohibition of cartels, a ban of trusts and cartels. We do have antitrust law, but antitrust does not apply to labor unions, and neither does it apply to government businesses such as the Federal Reserve System, which is a private corporation dressed up as a business. It's really just a business. The bank of banks, right? The Bank of the United States, as it were, and that is the party greatly at fault. But let me ask you this: when's the last time you've heard of a Christian talking about having heard about this topic at church? Right? It's never discussed at church ever. Even in the Reformed Church, there is so much pietism about so much privatization of Christianity that even people who have the law of God open before them on the Lord's Day in their lap never, ever consider that this is a judgment against them, right? A judgment, as the scriptures say, against the people of God, against the house of God for neglecting all the public ramifications of the gospel. And that's something that really bothers me as a deacon in the church, as a practicing Christian, that the Christian people are as ignorant about these issues, which are moral and theological issues, as those who've never cracked the Bible but just gone to the university, right, and absorbed the religion of progressivism and subjectivism and deconstruction and other evolution and other theories like that are part of the teaching program there. This is David Tulis, and I argue for local economy and free markets. And I was just mentioning Grandma Yellen, and but since we're talking about money and we're talking about a national economy, let me just tell you about a bill that has been introduced in the federal Senate. This is why we need to pray for the demise of national government over time. And the restoration of local economy and the free market, because this bill is a picture of the war on cash. Donnie Raines runs Don's Meats, not far from here. He runs a very fine meat shop, family business in Hickson, and he says that something's been happening in the economy as he sees it. There's very little cash in the economy, very few checks. Checks, he says, are making kind of an odd comeback. They're making an odd comeback. Cash is minimal, and about 90% of his transactions in dollar, let's say in dollar volume, I think you said, is in credit, and cash is much less common than it needs to be. I suggest to you, my listener, that you do more in cash. Cash is manly, as I like to suggest. It's more manly. It's more vigorous. It when you spend it, it satisfies. You might say deep primordial urges in a man. Okay, you my male listener, my guy listener, the man who matters. But here in this bill, it's called Combating Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing and Counterfeiting Act of 2017 by the good people in Washington. It's a sweeping bill to extinguish the last areas in the economy, the last types of businesses in the economy where you don't have to worry about the war on cash. The war on cash is not just inducements by marketing in the banking sector and credit card industry. It's an open warfare against liquid capital. The most liquid capital, of course, is cash, green rectangles, bags of coins, gold and silver. But here, what's in view are alternatives to Federal Reserve note cash. You know, the bank notes that we are so familiar with. And A in view would be Bitcoin in this war on terror, and then B, other types of businesses that deal with financial instruments. Guess what's going to become included in financial instruments? Okay, prepaid credit cards, prepaid phone cards, prepaid retail gift card, prepaid coupons. What about TGI Fridays and Chuck E. Cheese coupons? Are they considered now financial instruments? Maybe. Congress has been expanding its requirements for cash transactions and cash reporting over the years. Stockbrokers, casinos, currency exchanges, precious metals dealers, pawnbrokers, the post office. And in the U.S. Code Title 31, there is a growing list of businesses that are subject to cash reporting. And it's not just the intake in cash; it is the transportation of cash. And I'm getting these details from Tyler Durden, who's reposting a story by Simon Black at sovereignman.com, sovereignman.com, a financial privacy and investment website. Tyler Durden, of course, runs zerohedge.com, a very, very noted platform for news about the free market. And these are offenses that are in the federal framework as grievous as kidnapping or human trafficking or felony fraud, interstate fraud in the multi-million dollar scams. Those are bad. Those are, as the feds claim, they have claimed jurisdiction. They're bad and they're clearly evil. Right? These are clearly evil things, and you could debate whether these things should be in federal jurisdiction. I'd say probably they're pretendedly and claimedly in federal jurisdiction, and no one has defeated that claim for jurisdiction. And so things stand, right? Things stand over and over again, and they are kind of de jure or de facto law. It's law by fact, not law by law, right? So you could call that de facto law by custom. And we have in this bill a doubling of crimes, a doubling of penalties in jail to 10 years. So in other words, if you don't fill out a form telling the government that you're moving more than $10,000 in cash, you're going to be in jail double the time. And also, civil asset forfeiture is applied to you. And Simon Black says that the civil asset forfeiture goes not just upon the thing that was in view, right? Not just the thing that was part of the offense, but if you have a bank account, if you have stock, if you have annuities, if you have mutual fund account with Vanguard, let's say, these things are all subject to forfeiture. In other words, the government, the good people in Washington, can steal everything you have without due process, and that's under the civil asset forfeiture statute, which lets you claim administratively your rights. And there, you have to prove your innocence. The burden of proof is not on the good people to prove guilt, but on you to prove innocence. You have to prove that all these things are clean. That's very difficult to do, and it overturns American jurisprudence, the Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence that has at many points still a reference to God's laws that are the basis, of course, of justice and equity. I say that because I want you to understand that because we have rejected God's laws, because you, my listener, I know you're not a practicing Christian necessarily, but people you know who are, they have rejected God's law. Just ask you're not a Christian, but just ask somebody you know who goes to church and say, do you believe in God's law? And almost every one of them will say, well, God's law is not valid anymore. And so there you have it. If they say that, if that's their one sentence answer, it's not relevant anymore. What they're saying is, well, what we have from Washington is okay. We just have to accept it. And we really can't condemn it. We can't judge it. We can't condemn it. We can't hate it. We just have to accept it. It's the way things are, because after all, Satan is in charge of the world. This is the kind of balderdash that you get from a lot of church people who accept wiretapping, they accept surveillance, and they'll accept just as the way things are, right? Since Satan's in charge, the way things are, that if you move a monetary instrument or have a surplus of monetary instruments, that you can be spied upon, you can have the whole thing. Not just what's at issue, but all of your assets taken in civil asset forfeiture by the government. So what about Amazon.com? What about that company that issues and redeems prepaid gift cards? Will that be required to file reports on people who have collected more than $10,000 worth? What about a big businessman who redeems a whole bunch at one time? What if he submits a bunch at a whole time? Did he fill out a currency movement report? Right. I do know about the currency transaction report. That's called a CTR. And I'm not sure, the story doesn't say what the name of the movement form is, but that's what's in view as the government goes after prepaid credit cards, prepaid phones, prepaid retail gift cards, prepaid coupons, and in adjustments to U.S. Code Title 35. And of course, banks are part of the surveillance apparatus. Your bank is not your friend. You may have a nice relationship with the manager. You may know the lending officer. You may see 3 or 4 clerks pretty routinely if you're going to make deposits in your business. But the bank is not your friend. It's simply not your friend because it's part of the surveillance apparatus of the national government under the Bank Secrecy Act, right? The hilariously misnamed Bank Secrecy Act, I think of 1986 or so. And there's a lot to be concerned about. There's a writer named Louis Camerasano, and he's explaining the provisions that require the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection to devise, quote, border protection strategy to interdict and detect prepaid access devices, digital currencies, or other similar instruments at border crossings and other ports of entry for the United States, including an assessment of infrastructure needed to carry out the strategy. And the bill would give Congress 18 months, or give these 2 officials 18 months to give a report to Congress. The obligation to declare amounts in any form over $10,000 exists regardless of whether customs officials have a way of detecting such holdings. Camerasano says, since digital currencies technically travel with the holder wherever the holder goes, one would have to declare one's entire cryptocurrency portfolio each time the holder enters the United States. Such a declaration is not required for travelers who may happen to have bank accounts of precious metals worth more than $10,000 stored inside the United States. The type of infrastructure required to detect foreign holdings may come in the form of expanding Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act to currently unregulated foreign cryptocurrency exchanges and to non-U.S. citizens. FACTA currently applies only to U.S. account holders of certain foreign financial and non-financial institutions. Well, this is David Tulis. I do thank you for giving me just a minute of your time. We think you should love your neighbor and buy local. These things are, they seem a bit remote, but they are part of the overall picture. And they're a part of why I suggest you, my listener, reduce maybe a notch today, just a notch, your confidence in the good people. They're not there to save you. They're not there to protect you. They are there to harass you and harass thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent people who travel in and out of the country. I have a son who's traveling today by plane to Israel, and we had a chat about his phone. I suggested that he not take his phone, buy a phone in Israel while he's there, and just throw it away on his way home. It doesn't have a great camera, but that way you don't have to submit to the demand for search of your phone. By whom? By the Hezbollah? No, by the TSA, the Transportation Safety Organization, agency. And those are the people to be worried about. Not foreign terrorists, but domestic do-gooders, domestic people in their uniforms, looking out to protect you, to save us from ISIS, to save us from Muslims, to save us from the enemy. The enemy is always there. You better watch out. You better watch out.
In-depth traffic, news, and information. Mornings on Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7 FM.